And meanwhile, while that was happening up on Capitol Hill, President Trump and European Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker dialed back trade tensions yesterday, which began with tariffs on steel and aluminum exports and threatened to extend to cars. With new promises of trade, both sides agreed to work toward zero tariffs in exchange for relatively minor EU concessions. With no firm agreement on the tariffs already in place, Europe agreed to purchase liquefied natural gas when the U.S. builds more export terminals down the road, and to buy U.S. soybeans suffering in the trade dispute with China. The 25% tariff China slapped on U.S. soy imports is likely to reshape the global market and could mean Brazil, the #2 producer, will end up selling more soy to China as a result. The deal was announced shortly before Trump's meeting with Republican lawmakers, many of whom object to his tariffs and the new $12 billion bailout for farmers who are taking the brunt of it. Later today, President Trump travels to Iowa, where he's expected to tout the deal, the bailout, and rural economic development. So Steve Ratner is charting the trade story for us. So there was a lot of pomp and circumstance yesterday, the joint news conference hastily arranged. When you cut through it, though, was anything actually achieved aside from buying soybeans, which is good for our farmers, and the promise of hopefully not having more tariffs down the road?
Essentially, no. I think the one thing you could say in a negative sense, in a way, that was achieved was that Trump was put off from his idea of imposing 25% tariffs on autos, which is what he was threatening to do next. The steel and aluminum tariffs stay in place for the time, but at least it keeps the trade war from escalating and kind of puts it on hold. Puts it in abeyance for the moment while they try to negotiate this. But all those things you just read are really kind of happy-feely, touchy kinds of things, not substantive decisions.
And likely in response, as he watched news reports over the last couple of days of farmers across the country, of lobstermen in Maine, and people, manufacturers across the country suffering, and hearing from Republican senators saying, you got to do something about this.
Well, you have a variety of things going on. The companies that are that would be affected by them are seeing lower profits already. The car companies reported yesterday lower prices. You're seeing stock prices of industrial companies like Caterpillar that would be affected by this going down. And then, as you just referred, from the other direction, you saw this enormous blowback to the crazy idea of paying our soybean farmers $12 billion, which blowback came more from the Republicans than the Democrats, because if you're a small government Republican, how can you justify suddenly handing out $12 billion to a bunch of farmers?
Yeah, Ben Sasse, the Republican of Nebraska, said, you're not making America great again, you're making America 1929 again. You got some charts for us.
We got some charts to kind of fill you in on what's going on the trade front with Europe principally. So let's start by talking about how big trade is with Europe, how big our deficit in particular is with Europe. And so what you can see here is that essentially we have significant trade deficits with really basically, oops, wrong countries, basically with two countries, Italy and Germany. Germany, of course, produces a lot of cars. Italy, interestingly enough, produces a lot of pharmaceuticals and also some cars. I'm sure, Will, you drive your Ferrari around on the weekend. So,
only when I borrow yours, Steve.
So you know what a German...
Italian shoes?
Italian shoes, there we go. Italian shoes. So basically with the rest of Europe, in the aggregate, we're in a trade balance. It's really with these two countries where we have this trade deficit. And I would note that that's roughly 15% of our total deficit. Not surprisingly, of course, China is really the big problem, and we have issues going on with China. So the point really is that this is a relatively small part of the trade issue that we're talking about. If you take a look at what we buy and sell to Europe, you can see that, in fact, it really mirrors what the whole concept of trade means, that we are buying and selling a lot of the same things back and forth to China. So, for example, we sell Boeing airplanes to China, to Europe, and we buy Airbus planes from Europe. We sell things like engines and motors to Europe, which you can see here, and we buy a lot of cars from Europe. Pharma shows up in both places. We do a lot of pharma business with Europe. So this is really, in a way, the epitome of what trade is, that you exchange things where one country makes it better than the other. It's not simply something they make that we don't make, and vice versa. And then lastly, let's just remember what we're talking about when we talk about tariffs. The size of the tariffs between the U.S. and the EU are actually almost identical. They are both less than 2%. They're about about a tenth or 2/10 of a percentage point difference. This is how the WTO works. Developed countries, EU, US, and Canada, have relatively low tariffs. So-called developing countries, India, Mexico, and China, have higher tariffs. You can now argue whether China belongs in the developing category and should have lower tariffs as a result. But the whole point is that between the EU and the EU and the US, the difference in tariffs is actually quite small.
So, Katty Kay, we're just a week removed from the President of the United States saying the EU is one of the United States' greatest foes, from him going after Germany, going after Theresa May, from his trip across Europe. What brought the EU to the table and to the White House yesterday?
Look, my reading of this from what came out from Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU Commission President, yesterday, is that the EU got more out of this than the United States did. They came very determined to make a deal, and they said, OK, we'll buy more of your soybeans that you now can't sell to China. And somewhere down the road, if the conditions are right and the price is OK, we'll buy more of your liquefied gas as well. This helps America, and it helps the president make the argument that we're buying more from America than Europeans are buying from Russia. But that's down the road, and it depends on the price. The big thing that the Europeans wanted out of this, and this is why the fact that 10% of America's deficit with Germany is important, is they didn't want to get slapped with big tariffs on expensive cars. We know that President Trump has said before it drives him crazy when he's driving down Fifth Avenue to see all these Mercedes and BMWs, and that's what he really would like to hit. But the Europeans have managed to persuade them for the moment to say, OK, we're not going to slap a big tariff on luxury European cars, on those BMWs and those Mercedes. That was a huge deal for the Germans and for the Europeans, but particularly for the Germans. So I look at this and say, I don't actually know where it's going to go, because it's a temporary truce. We don't know if this is going to be permanent anyway. It could be, these things under President Trump can change from one week to the next. But for the moment, in this big, negotiation and the art of the deal, this deal seems to me to have been won much more by the Europeans than it was by the United States.
We are just getting started this morning. Still ahead, there are more questions about Michael Cohen's recorded conversations with President Trump and whether there are more tapes that have been handed over to investigators. Plus, one of President Trump's favorite false claims.
When we won the state of Wisconsin, it hadn't been won by a Republican since Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1952. Did you know that? And I won Wisconsin. And I like Wisconsin a lot, but we won Wisconsin. And Ronald Reagan, remember? Wisconsin was the state that Ronald Reagan did not win. I won Wisconsin, I won Michigan, I won states that, a Republican hasn't won in many, many decades, years.
Again, Republicans have won Wisconsin in a presidential race 7 times since 1956, and Ronald Reagan was one of those. Regardless, new polling this morning shows the president has a lot of work ahead of him if he's going to carry the Badger State and some others in the upper Midwest again. We'll go through the new numbers from 3 politically important Midwest states. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.